So very quickly, like the onshore wind energy group, the road mobility group focused in on what they prioritised as the 5 key principles. In the road mobility group, those were prioritised as: it has to be right for Devon, it has to be locally achievable, it has to support behaviour change, it has to create solutions for the long term, and that change is not optional but essential. We're now going to go to the groups, and we're going to hear very quickly from each of the groups on a number of things. First off, we're going to Claire's group, who we're looking at overarching statements, and I believe we have Anita who's going to share those for us. So over to Anita from Claire's group for overarching statements, please.
Unmute myself first. Hello, everyone. So yes, we were discussing. So what I'll do is I'll give you an overall overarching statement. So I will discuss.
Perfect.
Those.
Thank you, Anita.
Sorry. I'll read out. We support the ambition in the interim Devon Carbon Plan to reduce traffic emissions across Devon by making car use less attractive while maintaining mobility. And why is this important for reducing emissions while retaining mobility, and why should the wider membership of the Assembly support it? So, I mean, we discussed that private use of private car use in Devon alone is 40%. Produces 40% of the emissions, which is quite large, and well, it's huge. So this needs tackling, and how do we tackle it? But also we discussed how electric vehicles were an attractive alternative, but how these are out of reach for the majority of people who live in Devon because of the expense. And the overarching statement too, we recognise that there will likely always be a need for private car use in Devon, particularly in rural areas of the county, and support the initiatives included in the interim Devon Carbon Plan to help minimise the emissions these cause by investing the infrastructure to support the increased use of electric vehicles. So why is this important for reducing emissions, and why should we be supporting this? Obviously because electric vehicles don't produce the emissions, but again, they are very expensive. So how do we get around this? That will come a bit later. Right. So our overarching statement 3, our support for proposals to discourage car use is dependent on there being better public transport infrastructure across Devon, and that can be used as a reliable, regular, affordable and integrated alternative, and that significant progress is made on this before wider implementation. Obviously this is really, this for us was the most important statement that should have come right at the beginning. So we need to make train fares cheaper and affordable, make trains and buses much more frequent. We need the integrated system of transportation currently just doesn't work for people. So this is why we feel that this is what we need to focus on before anything else.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Anita. And we're loving the halo effect, the light behind you, by the way.
Thanks. Okay,
that's excellent. Thank you, Anita. So now we're going to go to Andreas's group, who are going to share the resolution and conditions on reducing road space. And I believe we have Ruth from Andreas's group. Over to you, Ruth.
Hiya. The first resolution was that in principle we support taking measures to reduce the road space available to cars and reallocate it to active and shared modes in Devon. We had a few thoughts about this. I mean, the obvious one being it's important because we're being asked to reduce carbon. Car use is the main contributor in Devon, so reducing car use will obviously reduce carbon consumption. This principle from the talks has been a proven method of reducing car use. Yeah, I think from some of the talks we had. It was also shown to provide better air quality locally, and it improves the general environment and physical and mental health and well-being of residents. it's broad. It affects everybody, I guess. That was the first resolution. The conditions that we added were mainly, we said that walking and cycling are the most efficient methods of moving about, yeah, or carbon neutral methods of moving about, yeah. So this is why we need to change the infrastructure. And people also need an alternative to reduced car usage.
Great.
I think that's everything.
Great, thank you, Ruth. And as we heard, there's some connection to the overarching statements that Anita shared with us. Thank you very much, Ruth. And now we're going to go to Fanula's group, who is also looking at reducing road-based resolution conditions. And I believe we have Sam, who's going to share those for us. Over to you, Sam.
Okay, hello everyone. Right, in principle, we support measures to reduce the road space available to cars and reallocate it to other more active and healthier modes of transport in Devon, such as walking, cycling. It will make driving less convenient. People will use alternative methods of getting about, which we've seen on some of the supporting videos last week. It will make roads safer for non-car users if there are less cars on the road, and making the roads narrower, making them more space for cyclists, and it will encourage active and healthy travel. It will also reduce carbon emissions by quite a lot if there are less cars on the road. But on the condition that there is provision of priority is given to ensure cheap travel around Devon, and also so we can travel in a similar time as now. Public transport must be more frequent, and trains need to be cheaper as they are much more expensive than the other modes of travel at the minute. On that condition, there is a provision of more park and ride spaces, and they are more modern, similar to how the park and ride spaces in Japan are, to help reduce the amount of cars that are driving around in town centres and city centres. And that's everything that I've got.
Thank you so much, Sam. I just want to pop back to Andreas. I think there was something else about tourism, Andreas. If you just want to share that for us.
Yeah, there was just one other condition on the on this principle of taking measures to reduce road space available to cars and reallocate it to active and shared modes of transport. And the condition was that Devon investigates introducing a tourist levy, somewhat similar to what's done in France. So a tax on tourists visiting that could be allocated to local communities to fund any of these improvements. And that was because it would be necessary to raise money for all this infrastructure that we're proposing. For example, it costs 1.5 million pounds, I think is what we'd heard, for each kilometre of cycle lane. And the idea that collecting a tourist tax on accommodation would be much easier than to administer than something more complicated around mileage or other.
Okay. Cool, thank you, Andreas. And now we're going to go to Claire's group, who were looking at parking and parking charges, and they're going to share the resolution and conditions there. And I believe we're going back to Anita.
Sorry, I need to unmute myself again. Yes, so we were focusing on parking and reducing the space available for parking and introducing parking charges in Devon. So so we were worried that residents were going to be penalised by higher parking charges, especially at low seasonal sorry, this is a little bit confusing. So I'm just going to read out what we put here, our sticky notes. There needs to be a countrywide strategy to this option. If parking charges are increased.
Anita, sorry for interrupting you. If you just read the resolutions and focus on condition 9, that was reworded, if you remember.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. Oops. Yes. Resolutions. Condition 9. Yes. So yes, we reworded our condition. So we've got condition 9. I can find it, here we are, on the condition that there is differentiated parking charges for electric vehicles and polluting vehicles. So the only problem with the offering of discounted parking for electric vehicles as well as hiked charges for everyone else is that it will create a wealth divide on the roads, which will most likely cause angst. So our proposals, some of them were discounts could also be offered for vehicles with 3 to 4 persons. This would discourage single person car journeys. You could also come up with a scheme that would mean a car owner would be entitled to so many tickets for leisure parking within a zone to be purchased online and only a certain amount per household. Also differentiation, based on the user's needs, not ability to pay. And we revised the wording of condition 9 because we didn't feel that it covered all areas and we've said it would be on the condition that there are differentiated parking charges based on a type of vehicle, electric, polluting, and B, users' needs, not ability to pay. So for example, workers would be able to park for work purposes, i.e. NHS users, doctors, NHS workers and doctors, etc.
Great, perfect. Thank you, Anita. Okay, we're going back to Andreas's group who were looking at workplace parking levies, and I believe we have Dan. So over to you, Dan.
Oh yes, we looked at the work one, which was in principle we support introducing workplace parking levies in areas across Devon. And we had 3 conditions that we looked at, and we also added in 1 additional condition based discussion. So the first condition is on the condition that money gained from workplace parking levies is spent on supporting transport routes and other viable incentives such as support for paying for shower facilities and things like that at work. So I think this is a good idea, is that it would also infrastructure for people who companies parking workplace parking levy, that money will be invested and lots of people benefit from that rather than just one particular company.
Great.
And additional money to invest in these resources. Condition 2 was on the condition that it only applies to businesses with over a certain number of staff and number of parking spaces. So that was a good idea because as to develop, and once they get up to a certain size, they'll contribute, but it gives them that starting benefit.
Okay.
The third one was that on the condition that the employer who pays, and it's the employer who pays, and cost cannot be directly passed on to the employee. Other than for that, we did have a question about whether there may be an intended consequence in terms of if people have may be disadvantaged compared to someone who on public transport when considering applicants for a job. And the final thing that we added in was a condition that there are an independent authority to oversee the collection and allocation of resources and ensure accountability, including regular reporting on collection and spending. So just this gain from workplace parking will be definitely in public transport and other ways of reducing carbon from transport.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Dan. And then finally, we're going back to Fanula's group and back to Fanula, I believe, for resolutions and conditions on congestion charging and ultra low emission zones. Fanula.
Yeah, thanks. So we, in principle, in our group, or we were looking at with the principle, we support introducing congestion charges and low emission zones in areas across Devon. And our group felt this was because we'd heard a lot of evidence that if there's a financial cost associated with driving, it disincentivises people from doing it, and that in turn will reduce car emissions. So we talked about 3 conditions for this support, and one was that there's careful consideration and review of the economic impact on the area. So because we were concerned about there being a negative economic impact on local businesses and areas from congestion charges and low emission zones, so looking carefully at this before any changes are brought in. The second condition was that there is improved frequency and coverage and cheaper public transport and school buses in place before these charges are introduced. Because if we want to stop people driving, there needs to be a realistic alternative in place for people to get about. And the third condition our group looked at was that it won't be introduced as a one-size-fits-all approach for all areas of the county and groups of people. Because partly we thought that congestion charges and low emission zones would only work in certain areas, for example, large urban areas with high car volumes, and we didn't want rural people living in rural areas or people in lower socioeconomic groups to be disadvantaged by these changes. So that's why a kind of tailored approach or thinking carefully about what's going to fit where in Devon was important.
Great, thank you, Fionnuala. And a huge thank you to all of the members that worked on the road and mobility workstream.